Howdy, folks. Welcome to the podCAST Iron. My name is Laura Mullen-Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. Our guest on today's show is Steve Daly. In the mid-60s, Steve studied with Julius Schmidt at the Cranbrook Academy of Art. During his time studying under Julius, Steve made a small cupola, and upon graduation, he took that cupola with him to his first teaching job at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. He then went on to, now I'm telling you too much and spoiling the story, but currently he is Professor Emeritus at the University of Texas in Austin, Texas, and he's a very active studio practice. So if you want to hear stories from the early days of how iron in art was spreading, then you'll have a real treat with this interview. Steve, thank you for allowing me to interview you. Capturing your story has really helped me fill in some holes in how cast iron art in America during the 60s and 70s was started. The work that you did to take what you learned from Julius and then go out on your own to spread that knowledge, you know how big of a part you've played in this movement. I don't need to tell you, but I do want you to know that we won't forget. And this interview is going to mean a lot to a lot of people. And you gave great advice, so thank you. The podCAST Iron Show is sponsored in part by individual supporters on Patreon. So thank you to everyone who has joined as a Patreon member to help me afford the production costs of this show. I'd also like to thank the top supporters of this show, which are the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance and Sloss Metal Arts. Our longtime top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts, is a national center for iron casting and metal art. And if you are a longtime listener to the show, I bet you know that they just hosted the National Conference on Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices at the beginning of this month. And I still feel like I left my heart in Birmingham. So I know that it takes so long for so many people to plan this event. 4 days just doesn't seem enough. And now that a little bit more time has passed since the conference and I've caught up on some sleep, I'm definitely missing all my friends. But doing this podcast helps me feel more connected to the community, and I hope it does for you too. So seriously, let's thank Sloss Metal Arts for sponsoring this show, but also for hosting the national conference. For more information about the Sloss Metal Arts program, visit their website, which is slossmetalarts.com, and also follow them on Instagram at slossmetalarts. And now, I talked about it during the last show, but folks, the clock starts again, the countdown to the 2025 National Conference. So let's go. Follow NCCC IAP on Instagram to keep up to date with the developments. And, we're really far out so far, but start thinking about what you want to do. What do you want to contribute? Do you want to serve on the steering committee? Do you want to take the large mold workshop and get your hands on that big bowl ladle? Do you want to do a performance piece or participate as a guest furnace? Or are you a student and you want to build your own student cupola for the student cupola competition? Everybody should enter the exhibition, so at least start making a piece. You've got 2 years. So your time starts now. Another top supporter of the podCAST Iron is the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that consists of iron casting artists in the western states of the U.S. They were established in 2008, and their organization's goals are to educate, demonstrate, and exhibit cast iron art in the western region of the U.S. And one of the ways that they accomplish this goal is by organizing a conference every 2 years. So historically, a different board member will host each conference, and it moves around from place to place. So start planning to come out west for the conference in fall of 2024. We've got plenty of time to put it on your calendar, just block off the chunk of, it's usually at the beginning of October. So, if you've only ever attended the national conference at Sloss, you got to get to the Western. They are not the same. It's like comparing apples to oranges, my friends. They both have their own style and distinct benefits. So obviously there's no solid dates, but I'll keep you informed as things start to develop. And the rumor that I'm spreading, but I heard it from a reputable source, so I think it's true, is the 2024 Western Conference may be in San Diego, California. So a big thank you to the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance and their board members for their support of this podcast and basically all of us in the community. For more information about this fantastic organization, visit their website, which is wciaa.org. And one more thing before we get into the interview, I just want to mention an upcoming opportunity. I've been talking about it for maybe a couple of episodes now, but this is an opportunity for you to apply and display your outdoor artwork. The city of O'Fallon, Missouri hosts a rotating sculpture series called The Shape of Community. The Shape of Community is a citywide sculpture exhibition featuring large-scale works of art in prominent areas throughout the city of O'Fallon, Missouri, and the artwork is loaned by the artists for an 18-month period of time. So currently there are 10 works installed, and you can see more details about them on the website. So for those of you who are watching the video version of this, you can see I have the web address on the bottom of my screen, and obviously the link will be in the show notes and description boxes and all of that. But if you're listening to the audio only version and you've heard me talk about it a couple of times and you're kind of curious to see what it's all about, the easiest way, when you get a chance, just when you get on your phone next or when you get to where you're driving to, go to Google The Shape of Community O'Fallon, Missouri, and it'll bring you right to the website. And you can see that the cast iron art community is very well represented in that group of 10 sculptures that are presently installed. So one noteworthy sculptor who is participating in the current round of the Shape of Community exhibition is Allison Olette Kirby. And I've already interviewed Allison on the podcast Iron, so if you haven't listened to her episode yet, you should. But she is board member for the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance, and she's co-director of 6 Mile Sculpture Works in Granite City, Illinois. So Allison's piece is currently installed in front of O'Fallon's City Hall. And so a lot of artists from our community participate in this rotating exhibition, and presently we're about a little less than a year out for this call for submissions. They'll be jurying your entries in early March of 2024. So start thinking about what piece from your catalog you would want to apply with, or even make a new piece for the deadline. You've got plenty of time. If you have detailed questions about this opportunity, please contact O'Fallon's Cultural Arts Coordinator, Martin Linson, at MLINSON@OFALLON.MO.US. And this is a great outlet for iron casting artists to showcase all the big, heavy metal works that we've been casting all these years. So finally, let's get into the interview with Steve Daly. Never forget that this episode is brought to you by our top supporters, the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance and Sloss Metal Arts. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and please enjoy. Well, Steve, thank you so much for letting me interview you for the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you.
And so we're going to start off, as is tradition, with our very first question, which is, well, Steve, who the hell are you anyways?
Okay, so at this point in my life, I'm a retired professor. I started out teaching in college in Minnesota, University of Minnesota, after graduate school, and then went back to California, where I'm basically from, and eventually migrated to Texas in the early 80s. And started teaching at the University of Texas about 1981. And retired, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. So right now I'm fancy free. And I can go to the studio every day, which I do. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm married. We have one daughter who's got a grandkid now. I like to combine both drawing and sculpture into one art form, which I basically describe as drawings with particles attached. And the particles are sculptural elements. And to me, it's a great challenge to try and work the sculptural elements into the drawing or vice versa.
Thank you for explaining all of that. And I'm interested to hear more details of that path. But I want to kind of talk about maybe one or two memories that you have from your childhood, things that maybe influence the type of person or artist that you are today.
Well, that's a huge question because a lot of that is definitely part of the growth period. My family's basically on the East Coast. And they're mostly lawyers. After the war, because he was in the military during the war, he became an advertising executive.
Hold on, Steve. I think we got clipped a little bit. So who are you talking about? Your father? Okay. So go from there. Your father?
So my father, after the military service, went into the advertising business. And over the years was able to move the family from the East Coast to the West Coast. In the interim, I went to something like 6 grammar schools. And I guess the only benefit of that, of course, is you get so you're not very shy about meeting new people. He eventually landed a job with Walt Disney in North Hollywood. And so we spent some years there, and I got to go on to the Hollywood sets. Probably could have been a member of the Mickey Mouse Club, but I thought it was really dumb.
Yeah.
But then we moved to Menlo Park, California, which is just below San Francisco. The majority of my growth really occurs there.
Okay.
So if I was to say there was a big influence, it was the San Francisco Bay Area. And of course, we lived part of it in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all of that influence. But I wanted to be a classical musician. So when I was in the 3rd grade, I started learning how to play flute. And later in high school, saxophone, because I thought that was cooler. The flute taught me the practice of doing the same thing basically all the time, over and over again, every day. It wasn't really meditative because, of course, it's work, but it did give me advance notice that if I was going to do a discipline in my life, I had to pay attention. And so by the time I got into the latter part of grammar school, I was in the high school orchestra and a band and a jazz band. And off I went then from Menlo Atherton High School, then to San Jose State University, which was nearby, just 30 miles south. And that's where everything started to really change. I took painting. I made paintings that got thicker and thicker. And my painting teacher said, "You need to go down and take sculpture." Because they were becoming like low reliefs.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's, of course, what happened. And pretty soon I just stopped playing the flute because I didn't feel I could do 2 disciplines at the same time. And found out about a group off campus of grad students, each of whom was older than me by quite a bit at that point. I think I started college when I was 18. So these guys, at the advice of my sculptor teacher, were willing to take a phone call about this kid that wanted to come over and learn stuff. So I started working there and I stayed there for the rest of my college education. They're really the ones that made the difference. No holds barred. If I was making something and they thought it looked like some other artist, they'd say, you're copying. So anyway, they were very good because they didn't use any academic language. It was all either technical or you think about this and that, go see this, look up this artist, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of questions about what did I think I was doing, so on and so forth. Anyway, they taught me how to cast. And of course, at that point, we're talking about early 60s.
Okay.
At that point, that's all standard investment. Ceramic shell hadn't really been invented yet. But we had to manhandle these gigantic molds. We had to have a burnout kiln.
Mm-hmm.
We had to have a melting furnace and all sorts of stuff. And this was in a residential neighborhood in San Jose, California, right next door to the neighbors. So when we didn't melt silicon bronze because we didn't have enough money for that. We melted yellow brass from plumbing parts, gave off a lot of zinc. And so we drank a lot of milk.
Good.
Covered all the windows with blankets so the neighbors wouldn't see the smoke. So of course you're inhaling all that crap. But anyway, it didn't take but a couple of times and I was hooked. I mean, I was just completely hooked. It was the tactile aspect of making something. It was the building in real space as opposed to me. It was knowing these other guys were doing the same thing. So there was a camaraderie there, kind of a companionship, even though they were each at least 5 or 6 years older than I was. So I worked with them in this backyard foundry until we took over an almost abandoned factory that made sirens in San Jose. And so for the next couple of years, we worked in this place, which was called aptly the Siren Works. And more casting, So eventually I understood that these had to be photographed, they had to be patinaed properly, they had to be cared for, they had to be stored, they had to be shipped, you had to enter shows. So, and I did. I got in a lot of shows. So when I applied for admission to Cranbrook Academy of Art, I got a scholarship. While I was working with them, they graduated.
Yeah.
So anyway, they were very patient. And I made some pretty major works as an undergraduate, size-wise and complexity. And I also started combining materials, like aluminum, steel, bronze, or brass. And I had already met my wife-to-be in another undergraduate class, and we married and went off to graduate school. So the transition from California to Michigan was radical.
I can imagine.
So because Michigan was so odd to us anyway, after the Bay Area, we pretty much stayed on campus, but that was okay. Every student got their own studio. This was, of course, during the period of time when Julius Schmidt was the primary professor.
Okay.
And he was the whole time I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I had studio mates. The most influential probably is Winifred Lutz. I'm not sure you've ever heard of her, but she went on to teach at Aquinas College in Michigan, and she was a workaholic. So I had the studio, but she was always busy. So and everybody was. I just sort of knew that I had to not slow down for a minute. So we went to school at Cranbrook 7 days a week. And the idea was you had to be there by 9 and you had to stay until dinner time. And on the weekends, you went in too, but on Sunday you could come in at lunch with the assumption that somebody might have gone to church. But nonetheless, we went. So I mean, the work, so when you have, I think there were 11 or 12 students under Julius, and all of them amazing. We had We had one fellow from Japan that didn't speak any English at all. It was just an amazing, diverse, and energized crew. There was no heliarc welding. There was no arc welding except buzzbox. So when we put something together, we had to use oxyacetylene. And the way that it went was like this. Julius had come out of the military, and some of us think mentally he never left the military. He was a pretty tough guy, but he'd come in and say, okay, we're going to have a pour next Friday. So that meant no matter where you were working on a piece of plasticine or wax or assemblage or whatever, you had to have something ready next Friday.
A mold. You had to have a mold ready?
Mold ready, yeah, a mold ready, something ready to pour.
Yeah, okay.
And sometimes we poured in bronze, sometimes aluminum, and sometimes iron. Iron was always a bigger event. Not to say we couldn't do large scale with bronze. There was a huge still furnace in there. So we could pour a lot of bronze all at one time. And of course, partially he had that in there for himself because he also made really big bronzes. But when it came time to do iron, we had to arrange ourselves as a team. As you know, iron requires teamwork, totally teamwork, very committed teamwork. If your team is not together, you could have an accident. And you could actually get seriously hurt. So we got pretty good at that. And I managed to put myself in every one of those iron pours I could get in. We had a number 0 whiting. I might have told you that, but it would dump out 1,000 pounds of iron every 23 minutes, something like that.
Whew.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
So you had to be ready to go. I mean, it was click, 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 click. We poured mold. Sometimes it was a 2-story foundry. So, and the chain hoist went all the way up. So we could pick up this ladle, which was about this big in diameter, and take it all the way up to the ceiling, and then move it across and pour a mold that was 12 feet off the ground. And we did. So, I mean, that was just amazing to me.
It's amazing to everybody. Yeah.
Especially having come from California, where we had really limited resources and limited scale and limited finances and everything.
Yeah.
So, and we poured, the iron we used was mostly scavenged radiators all around. Julius would, I don't know how he got them, but there always seemed to be piles of radiators around, which of course we had to break up days ahead of time, measure the coke, measure the limestone, measure everything. And he wouldn't start until everything was ready to go, which of course that's correct.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Because once you start, you're on.
Yeah.
And with that big behemoth, why, you were really on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So during the beginning of my second year, I knew I really liked to do iron, and I wanted to know how to make a cupola. And so he asked me a few questions and then said, okay, I'll supervise you. And so I had to make a drawing of the machine, and I had to describe what the functions were and why, and what about the tweers, and what about wind pressure, air pressure, the size of charges, blah, blah, blah. All those formulas had to be resolved.
Before you even began.
Well, while I was actually already working on the machine.
Okay.
I mean, I knew I wanted the size to be 8.5 because Federico Fellini had just come out with the movie 8.5.
Okay.
Like before your times. Anyway.
Well, tell us, so that influenced, tell me about it, because I don't know.
The diameter of the cupola was based on my adoration of Federico Fellini's movie 8.5.
Okay.
And I knew it had to be under 12 inches, and I knew it had to be bigger than a little dinky thing. So
Yeah.
to have something that would give me some real metal,
Mhm.
but something that I could probably in the end run either by myself or myself and one other person.
Mhm.
And so that worked out. And we made the cupola and ran it several times while we were at Cranbrook. And then on graduation, I loaded it into my truck and we took it to my first job, which is at University of Minnesota. So we both graduated from Cranbrook. My wife was in fabric design. And at that time, university teaching jobs were precious, but wasn't done like it was today. Somebody came to Cranbrook. Partially that's because Cranbrook's a big prestigious place.
Still is. It still is.
And recruited at the school. So I had a job before I even graduated. We never went down into Detroit because Detroit was about to burn up in its riots.
Mm-hmm.
So we were very much sequestered on these beautiful grounds designed by Eros Siranen, where they had a prep school and they had an astronomy area. So anyway, we stayed there for a little more than 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
We experienced 2 Detroit winters, which we'd never experienced before. And the demand for us was to build, in order to graduate, you had to mount a successful show. And successful was guaranteed only if you could get the signature of all the faculty members in each of the different departments to sign your thesis.
Okay.
If you didn't graduate.
Mm-hmm. Would you be able to keep working in the program to try again, or was that you're done?
You're out.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Private art school, big reputation. They didn't mess around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In fact, they can be so tough that later, well, my wife also went to school at Cranbrook at the same time.
Yeah.
Years later, our daughter went to Cranbrook.
Okay. In what concentration did she?
Metalsmithing.
Okay. Yeah.
But I thought that they were being too tough on her. And then I stopped and thought about it and realized that that's just the way it is there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was one person there that got booted out right in the same wing of the building that I was in.
Mm-hmm.
24 hours. So, I mean, that in and of itself was a very large motivating factor.
Yeah. What kind of work were you making when you were in grad school?
I was interested in a machine man aesthetic. That's going to be similar to, say, for instance, artists such as Edoardo Palazzi. A lot of Europeans.
Okay.
It seems like I feel really, really old, but there weren't that many sculptors visible in the United States at that point. We didn't have web. We didn't have giant conferences except for teaching jobs.
Mm-hmm.
The ISC had just barely started having its international sculpture conferences for everybody. So I looked mostly to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that the aesthetic that interested me the most and still interests me is combining organic and mechanical forms. I like that juxtaposition. So curve, straight line, right angles, curve, so on and so forth. Repetition, overlap. I learned early on how to set up a formal composition and through design, which we took at San Jose State. We took design for 3 years. We took drawing for 3 years. It was a serious art program for a state university, and those things all sunk in. And I look at European art and some American art, and try and demystify the arrangement for myself. And that all sunk in deeply. So now we're at University of Minnesota.
Yeah.
It was the first teaching job, and most of my students were older than I was.
Yeah.
But we all got along, and
Good.
there was not much, but a tiny foundry there, and where Wayne just finally escaped in the Holman building.
Yeah.
And as was stated in Wayne's interview with you, the furniture refinishing department for the university was just above that floor.
Right.
So how we never burned it to the ground is beyond me.
It's okay. You got away with it.
I mean, I knew about it, but I didn't know about it until the second year I was there. And so by that point, we'd already poured a ton of metal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Without knowing. Fortunately, the good ventilating hood right there.
Yeah.
That somebody else had put in, not me. There was a foundry pit that we could use by lining it with bricks. We could turn it into a burnout kiln.
Oh, wow.
For an investment. It wasn't until the second or third year of my teaching there that I got a hold of a bread dough mixer from Commercial Kitchens with one of those plows that goes like this.
Uh-huh.
Mull sand.
Okay. Were you using sand for molds at Cranbrook?
Yes.
Okay.
The investment molding that we use at San Jose State for me, I continued with that a little bit while at Cranbrook because we could build our own beehive style burnout kiln in the foundry, burn something out and pour it right there in the foundry. But eventually, if you wanted, Julius would show you how to do sand molds. And of course, just being there, you could watch Julius make these incredibly elaborate negative molds by putting all these hundreds of pieces together. And it was like building with building blocks. It was amazing. I mean, it's self-supported, so you could build up. So anyway, I wanted to learn how to do that. So I did, and I did some relief work so I could make simple sand molds. And I poured a lot of aluminum. Somewhere along the line at Cranbrook, I should mention, Julius said that we should try doing something that eventually became known as melt out.
Okay.
And that was where you took a wax pattern and you sprayed it or brushed it with a Fasico product called Ceramol 5.5 and let that harden and then put on a wet coat of the same product mixed with sand and then ram that up in self-set sand. Boom, boom, boom. And then put it in a low heat oven, about 350 for an amount of time. Sometimes 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
And once the wax was evacuated, you could pour it. Now, a lot of the wax went right into the sand mold. And when you poured these, and I'm sure some of your listeners have already poured these, they flame up like crazy. So there's just a lot of gas and flame and a lot of folderol. But you can make shapes with extreme undercuts, and you could do linear things that are impossible to do with piece molds.
Mm-hmm.
So I fell in love with it because my work is really quite organic. But I in the end could use a combination of self-set sand piece molds and this melt out process to get the aesthetic look that I was interested in and the scale for my degree show.
Do you want to talk about your show a little bit?
No, as I said, you had to have the signatures of all the faculty on your thesis. We had to do a thesis with photographs, but none of that's very unusual. We got to show in the museum, which is a real museum with real curators. Had a real opening. And by the way, Julius called me Daly the whole time I was there, except that night. He might have used my first name at some point, but that was not the norm. And I didn't feel that he was demeaning me either. But he was a man of few words. I would attribute that partially to his military background,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that he had an economy of words. He didn't dither around when he spoke.
Mm-hmm.
We're now at University of Minnesota.
And so you brought your 8.5 inch. Did you run that in the building?
I think so. I've been asked that numerous times, and I actually can't remember,
Okay.
but I think so because I just remember the students that were interested in that, and I remember that they wanted to do that. So I probably said, fine,
Yeah.
I just don't remember specifically. I remember very much by the time I get back to California. I remember most of the encores, which were many, but
Uh-huh.
I remember University of Minnesota. Um,
How long were you there for?
2 years.
Oh, that's such a short amount of time. And you were so young at that point. You said most of your students were older than you. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but my wife and I are Californians, basically.
Yeah.
Um, we had a baby while we were in Minnesota, and we just wanted to get back to California.
Yeah.
So a job became available in Northern California, up in the redwood trees, up in Humboldt County, which is 310 miles north of San Francisco.
Okay.
At that point, it was hippie heaven. The main crop beside redwood trees, which when I could watch them from my office, dragging redwood trees away in the trucks.
Wow.
I mean, like every minute, another truck would go by just about, with those trees.
Wow.
But the next cash crop was marijuana,
Mm-hmm.
Humboldt Gold.
Mm.
To this day, it's still a big product.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I liked being there a lot. I was at Humboldt for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
So we got there 1969.
Okay.
Just to put in the context, stayed till 1979. And really my whole time with iron starts in 1965 and ends in 1979.
Mm-hmm.
So since 1979, I haven't done anything,
Mm-hmm.
which is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, at Humboldt, the students were dirt poor, and there weren't a lot of economic opportunities for them up there, but there
Mm-hmm.
were a lot of them. And we had a gigantic ceramics department. And if you know California, you know that California ceramics were really, really big during the 60s.
Okay.
With Robert Arneson and Peter Bokos and a huge number of artists that people were looking at. And sculpture was on its way up. So University of California at Berkeley was building a foundry with Tuja Bruni and Harold Paris and Bokos. And these guys had already built the foundry that I described to you. I'm sorry, I got out of sequence there.
That's okay.
During the period of time when we were talking about college in San Jose, at the same time, we were noticing that other foundries were starting to happen around the Bay Area, in particular at UC Berkeley.
Okay.
With those sculptors that I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to visit them and did a little mutual learning. Now we loop back over to teaching jobs, and then I go to Humboldt State University. And at that point, we were working in a normal classroom, and I turned it into kind of a foundry. It had wooden floors, wooden desks.
Yeah.
With places for books. I mean, it was not hardly a workspace, but it did have a very big patio outside. And the weather there was damp because it rains all the time, but easy to work out there. So we did a lot of work outside in this place, and I built a bigger furnace, a bigger cupola, and they loved using the big cupola. So we did a lot of pours for a lot of molds, and some of the students made some pretty good work. I have to say, it wasn't for me, the aesthetic of iron has not been very useful as an artist to me. It was an economic bonsai. And because I think I charged them, because we had to pay for Coke and we had to pay for this, I think I charged them 15 cents a pound. And so they, as long, and I wouldn't pour molds unless they helped with the process. So they had to learn the process to get their molds poured.
Yeah.
And that worked fine. We had quite a good team. Team stuck together pretty well. One of the members was Paul McMahill, who went on to be the manager of a couple of big foundries, but he went on to the one that's in upstate New York that pours Shapiro's work.
Okay.
Butterfield. But Paul was a go-getter, and there were a lot of other people involved like Paul.
Yeah.
At that point, I'd already done some workshops in metal casting, and I took Paul to Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina a couple of times, and we took the cupola with us.
Really?
Actually, we might have done that with the 8.5.
Yeah.
Earlier from University of Minnesota. I'm getting out of here.
It's okay.
While at the University of Minnesota, I worked with this student named Paul McMahon, and he got really involved with this. And then the two of us took that little furnace to North Carolina and did a workshop at Penland School of Crafts during one of the summers. Maybe.
And this was in the 60s?
Let's see, Penland was 1968.
Okay, the end of the 60s. Wow.
Well,
what did Penland like? How did Penland? Because now Penland does have a kind of iron rotation every once in a while. You know, not the blacksmithing iron like they do every once in a while offer iron casting. So, what was the reaction of the school community to the iron?
Administration was pretty much just supportive of whatever you wanted to do that turned the students on. But there was already a furnace there. I think the sculptor who put that together was named Donald Drum. I'm not sure, but they didn't have any iron. There was, we had to. I basically carried everything in my vehicle down there to do all of this, including the Coke.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was like an autonomous unit. We came in, set the cupola up, told everybody what we were going to do, scared up an audience, and did it.
And you said it was like a summer class week?
It was one of their, I forget how long, 6-week classes or whatever.
Okay.
It was within summer classes.
Okay.
Some kind. I don't know how they academically break down their time, but it wasn't a workshop where I went down there for 2 or 3 days and then left.
Okay.
It was there for several weeks, and I taught there, I think, 3 summers during that period of time, but only did iron during one.
Okay.
Do you know Penland?
Yeah. Well, so like your daughter, I am a metalsmith. That's what I went to school for. Just I did small metals, jewelry. Like I have a jewelry bench. And so that's what I originally went to undergrad for. And then, and I'm also familiar with Cranbrook because of the metalsmithing reputation, and ended up going to the University of Georgia for my master's in metalsmithing, and the sculpture program happened to have a really big iron casting element in it. And Say that again?
George?
Oh,
Or is
well, no, well, he's at Georgia State. And so this
oh,
was at the University so they're very close. They were very close. But my professor was Jimbo Nicorsi, or Jimbo. Everybody calls him Jimbo. And so I just kind of got lucky and fell into it because I was always interested in doing larger scale casting, but I was more interested in bronze. And so we did melt out traditional investment, and they had a beautiful burnout kiln that he had written a grant to get, and we did the bronze, and that was great. And then we did a unit on iron in the like class, and after that first unit of sand molding and iron, I just fell in love with it. So I still
right.
finished out my degree in metalsmithing, but I really was also able to focus a lot on the iron casting, and then have kind of gone on to try and merge the two. So I'll use iron casting in my metalsmithing, and yeah, that's my little backstory. So
That way you can make big shapes and little tiny shapes and put them
yeah.
together.
Yes, yes, yes. And also the material is very interesting because it's, sort of this industrial or lowbrow material, the iron,
Right.
right? I mean, we were talking about you were charging your students in California, in Humboldt, California, you were charging them cents, 15 cents per pound. And so then if you get that and you put that in a jewelry setting, and you're using setting the iron as the focal point of the jewelry piece, what does that say? So that's kind of that's kind of uh how I've developed my artistic practice with both of them. So I've always wanted to do iron at Penland. It's been like a bucket list thing. Just
Um,
and yeah.
Have you been there? Have you been to Finland?
So, yes. So my professor Jimbo, but then also his wife Leanne, they're really good friends with Elizabeth Brim. She's a blacksmith, very well-known blacksmith, and teaches in the Penland area, and like teaches at Penland, but she like lives, you can walk to the school. It's so close to her house.
Oh,
And so I had it in my head that I wanted to be a Penland artist in residence, because they have the artist in residence for 3 years, and that's what I wanted to do out of grad school. And I was young and ambitious. And so Jimbo and Leanne said, well, if you're going to try and be an artist in residence there in the residency program, it's pretty prestigious. You should go there and visit so that at least they know your face and your name. And so they set me up to go stay with Elizabeth Brim, and she took me in and let me stay at her house and introduced me to all the people to know. And so I was there for just like a weekend, and it was beautiful. I've never been as a student though. So it's definitely a bucket list thing. And it's exciting that every once in a while there's an actual cast iron art concentration that we
right.
have at that school. So,
Aren't we lucky that in our lives we've run across people like that woman you had there?
oh yeah, it was a
Yeah.
gift. It was,
Huh.
her taking me in was definitely, and she's, very well known too. Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't get the residency, but that's
Well,
okay, because sometimes we learn a lot from failures.
we all have to learn the word no.
Yeah.
Come to grips with it many times
Yeah.
and stand back up again and keep going.
Mhm. Yeah.
So to finish up on Humboldt,
Yes.
after 1 year or so there, the school got a hold of a federal program called Work Study.
Uh-huh.
It still goes on. So you could hire students for peanuts and have them do jobs. So that coincided with my discovery that we had at Humboldt the original bookstore building which was a Butler building, one of those sheet metal buildings, long rectangular building, not an enormously high ceiling, but pretty high, like about this. And so I organized a group of students, and the school and the janitor system and the maintenance guys and everything like that. And we put that building back together again.
Oh, when you said you had the library building, like it was deconstructed.
It was in storage.
Okay.
It had been taken apart.
Yeah.
But all these work study students thought that was just perfect. And a lot of them went on to be students of sculpture. And boy, they protected that building like crazy. I mean, you couldn't have stolen a screwdriver out of there. People, where are you going? So they had a lot of pride in the building, had accident-free experience there. So we moved everything down to that building, which liberated the classroom it was in a different location on campus, sort of downhill. It's in the woods. So the main building is up in the redwood trees, and the next building down is closer to the ocean. So, and it was across from ceramics. So there was a good mix of ceramic and sculpture students going back and forth between classes there and influencing each other. We had a good visiting artist program. So, I mean, all in all, the 10 years I was there was really quite a good experience, I must say. And I was able to make my own work there, of course. And, a couple of years, 3 years or so into teaching, I applied for the Prix de Rome, which is a government grant.
Okay.
Which allows one to go work in Italy, all expense paid.
Wow.
2 years.
2 years.
2 years. Okay. Now it's 1 year.
Okay.
And it was 2 years. You got 1 year, and then if they thought you were doing okay, they'd give you the second year. So we have to move the whole family to Rome, Italy for 2 years.
Wow.
It was great. It was a life-changing experience. Had nothing to do with cast iron. But I built a foundry there. They didn't have one, so I built one.
Okay.
Gas-fired crucible furnace.
Okay.
Took a long time to get the gas line approved, but once we got it, there was a chicken coop in the backyard made of brick up against the Aurelian Wall, which is the Aurelian Wall is the original fortress wall of Rome. Big history. And anyway, so I built a foundry in there and was able to continue working. Nobody else was in sculpture at that point. We usually have 2 people in each discipline. But at that point, we had somebody in sculpture, but they weren't interested in casting. Anyway, I was able to continue building work, and eventually we brought it all back. If you lived in Europe for 18 months, everything that you owned was considered to be a personal item. And so you didn't pay tariff coming back. Nowadays, if you work over there and make something of value, you could be taxed on it.
Mm-hmm.
So then we came back to Humboldt for a couple more years, and my wife had cabin fever after Rome.
Yeah.
And I never was able to sort of reconnect the student group that I had. They'd already graduated.
Yeah.
So it was basically starting all over again. And meanwhile, I'm hearing a lot about Texas. Shows in Texas, and I'd gone to graduate school at Cranbrook with James Searles, who's a big Texas artist. And he kept telling me to come down there, come down, you gotta come down. So finally, we moved to Texas too. Moved to San Antonio because I got a job in San Antonio, but I didn't like it. So in short order, we applied for a job in Austin and got it. And so we moved to Austin, Texas, which has been fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I had a foundry there, which we operated maybe once every 2 weeks, but no iron. And the students in Texas were um, much more sober than the students in Northern California, meaning career driven, less drugs. And I had to be really careful in California about the drugs, because if the students came into the foundry stoned, then we could have a problem.
Yeah.
I had to monitor that pretty carefully, but in Texas, it wasn't a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's very, well, we were impressed with the Texans because they are truly Southern friendly, and so it's been comfortable.
Good.
It's been really nice. School was good. I was able to change the curricula quite a bit over the years. And
In what way?
for the visiting, well, either to extend or destend some of the classes and add other ones. There weren't enough sculpture classes, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
There probably could never be enough sculpture classes. But we stayed there another couple of years, and then now we're in Austin. Until I finally just decided to retire.
Yeah.
My feeling about retiring is that one should get out of teaching when you get cynical. And I was getting there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And rather than expose students to that and hurt their curiosity, I got out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. I think I taught for a total of 45 years.
Yeah.
A long time. And so it was time anyway, And since then, I've enjoyed my retirement time a lot. But, and continue to look forward to making more art.
Good. Yeah. So what do you have hot on the horizon? You got anything?
In this room is what I call the drawing room.
Okay.
I don't have a very big shop. This building was purpose built. We're in a basically 2-story garage building. There's room for a car downstairs in my shop. There's really small. And I had to get a smaller bandsaw. I had to get a smaller drill press. Just to get them physically in the space. My first studio here was a huge metal building in a town called Dripping Springs, which is out of town.
Okay.
So it was rural. My neighbors included a lot of goats and sheep. And now that town has become a suburb of Austin. Too much traffic and people, God, terrible. And it was the commute, which when I started the commute started out at about 30 minutes maximum. And now it's up to an hour and a half. Same commute. So I was losing too much time.
Yeah.
So we got this older house, this one, and remodeled it so that both of us have studios here. And now I just come out the back door.
Yeah. Living the dream now.
Pretty good.
Yeah. And so what are you working on?
I'm literally working on right now 2 huge drawings. There's one here and one over there.
Okay.
I can't see it very well, but
that's okay. Because also remember, some people are just listening to this. And so just give us a little description.
Well, drawings are about 4.5 feet long, wide, and maybe close to 3 feet tall. So pretty big.
Yeah.
They're being conceived, knowing ahead of time that I'm going to attach these sculptural elements to them. For instance, Here's a little chair, for instance.
Okay.
It's
Is that
with,
fabricated steel?
no, this is cast
Oh,
aluminum.
cast aluminum. Okay. Apologies.
I fabricate when you can cast,
I know, but it just looks so regular.
Well, it's got a texture. You can't see the texture, but
No.
um, this was one that I did. And it has three legs. So it will sit on the drawing like this
Yeah.
at some point. And it will act as a conduit for something either emerging from the chair or a series of things moving toward the chair. It'll be some kind of quote centerpiece. And that's how I would make a decision about where it would go on the drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of pursuant to the idea of organic and mechanical, I like working with inks and watercolors. Now I started using some gouache, but ink and watercolor are both water medias, and they're both liquid. So if you make a drip going across to get to another spot, that drip becomes part of the drawing, whether you like it or not. You either have to collage over it or work it into the composition, and I do both. And I do make enough errors to have to do that, but I cut up old drawings that I did. I cut them up and save them, and those become my collage elements. I don't use any collage elements from magazines or anything like that. They're all from recycled drawings.
Mm-hmm. Where do you get your elements, your three-dimensional elements, or where do you cast them?
Well, I cast them at school for the whole time I was teaching.
Okay.
Now I'm casting at a place called Deep in the Heart of Art, Texas. It's in Bastrop. It's nearby. And their specialty has been very detailed cowboy art. I mean, saddles and horses. And if you can cast all that stuff, you can cast just about anything. So, and they're okay. They do a good job. They use Strandstall. And they've become very popular. Turnaround time is very slow. But it's local and they know me, and so I can get work done there.
That sounds like a good resource to have.
It works okay. And I can do the spring and venting on myself on my own, so I can do it the way I want, or I can let them do it. So it depends on the shape. So and so that's where I cast, and they didn't cast any aluminum until I showed up, and so then I brought some aluminum out and brought out all the fluxes and showed them how to melt aluminum. So now we can pour aluminum there. So that was a little bit of a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. It sounds like they benefited and you benefited.
Yeah, it was a two-way street.
Yeah. Well, I want to circle back to some other things like kind of before we do the advice and then end it and go on to the after show. I just want to know like your opinion of why you were interested in spreading the knowledge of iron casting.
No, I thought it was in the beginning. I thought it was pretty intriguing to take something as common as a household radiator, and turn it into something else. It was like it's like, okay, let's take this and make sure it never looks like that again, but not throw it away.
Yeah.
So it's a form of radical recycling.
Yeah. I mean, just today, just to touch on that and elaborate little bit earlier today, having coffee with a girlfriend of mine, I had to explain that we can't just go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy cast iron
No,
broken up. Like, we can't just like you would buy gravel or you would buy like a sheet of plywood. We have to source it from sometimes scrap yards. At the University of Georgia, we would go to brake shops, tire shops and get the brake rotors. And so that is something that I find really attractive and interesting conceptually, as well as, I mean, it also is like, has a benefit because it's a lower cost, because a lot of times we can just either get it for free, just haul it away, or we can get it for the cost of the scrap.
Right. Well, I'd continue with that right there. I mean, I think that the fact that it is a minor material disavows students from understanding it as being precious. And I think that there's too much of that, too much preciousness. And so being able to make something, and then if they didn't like it, I just tell them to throw it back in the cupola,
Mm-hmm.
and that'll like blow their minds. What do you mean? What do you mean? Well, I mean, you didn't spend any money on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you could do that. And then I guess another motivating factor for me in iron over the long run is from the point of view of teaching. And it's related to that attitude I just shared with you, because a lot of students come in and they don't know what is going on, or they have a very clear idea about what's going on, but they don't want to go, they're not interested in what you've got going on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, when you get a hold of a group and you're going to decide to make a team, people have to loosen up on their egos.
Yeah.
And you have to learn how to get a hold of collaboration, teamwork, trust, a lot of really good values, I think. And those things can be taught without teaching them
Yeah.
through these processes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a huge benefit personally,
Mm-hmm.
especially even more so these days with the sort of fractured society that we've got. I mean, once everybody's been through an Iron Corps, you're bonded.
That's true.
You survive.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and people know each other in the future because of that. Oh yeah, we were there together in Art 3. That's terribly important, I think, because art is so steeped in the success of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not demeaning that either. I believe in that also, but the notion of collaboration is underserved.
Mm-hmm. So this is something in some of these interviews, there's things that I want to talk about, but it's also, this is your interview. And so I'll kind of hold back a little bit. But when you were talking about your music career, so as a child and early adult, I played the French horn, classically trained horn performance. And I thought I was going to go to college for horn performance. And I got to the level where you know, or maybe like 16, 17, and you're pretty good. I was teaching younger students. So they, the band director trusted my ability to start teaching, the fifth and sixth, the younger kids. And so then you start to compete, you start to go and you go into the audition room and you play your audition, and they, you play some scales, and then you sight read a piece. And right before you go in, though, you've been sitting in the hallway. Is this familiar to you too? You sit in the hallway and you can hear the people that you're going against, that you're competing against, for first chair, second chair, for a part, like the seat in the wind ensemble versus the symphonic winds or whatever level. And you hear everybody else. And I always, with music, I always enjoyed the team aspect of playing in a concert band, or even like a little quartet or something, or even a, duet. I always enjoyed the team aspect of it, but I didn't enjoy the competitiveness. And then also this idea of, if you choke during your interview, you can get kind of like miscast, and then you're stuck with that. And so the competitive aspect of it just really turned me off. I don't know if I've ever actually even talked about it much, but I didn't like that. I knew the rest, if I stayed with horn performance and went to college for horn performance, the rest of my life would be extremely competitive and probably competitive against my friends because the, the circles are fairly small when you get up in higher levels of achievement. And so
Yeah.
I think I was like maybe a senior in high school, and I decided I didn't want to go to school for music. I wanted to go to school for art because I thought maybe it would be less competitive, which of course I was terribly wrong. But you don't
But just
know.
slightly naive. That that reminds me of another thing about you were classical and I was classical.
Yeah.
And so we both suffered, I think, I'll speak for myself. I could do Mozart, but I couldn't do abstract painting.
Yeah.
And there I realized, and when I got to be in a jazz band, all they did was improvise,
Yeah.
read music. I'm going, what do you mean? Where's the music?
And they're like, it's just 12 bars, man.
You
Just
just start, and I go, well, no. No. So I wasn't good enough or had gone far enough to be able to synthesize that classical training. Well, like the pianist Keith Jarrett is unbelievable, classically trained jazz pianist.
yeah.
I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it doesn't matter. The thing of it is I wanted to invent. And when I got to art, it was 100% invention.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be influenced, sure, but then you had to learn how to get out of the influence. And then, so there was these personal challenges, it's like, oh, okay, I'll work on that, blah, blah. But you're talking to yourself.
Yeah.
And so for me, that it was perfect because I could express myself, not always the right way or correctly, but I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I switched from classical music to art sophomore year in high school. No,
Mm-hmm.
never look back.
Yeah. I think it was in my junior year of high school, I got to take an independent study in metalsmithing. God bless that wonderful, the art teacher at the high school. He let me have an independent study, but I basically just read the, Tim McCrite metalsmith book and kind of tried to teach myself how to use the jeweler saw. And he saw that I had passion. And this is one thing that another reason I think why I did the shift was because with the music performance, I didn't like the fact that you could choke. It's like you could study and do all of your scales, but when it came time to the performance, it could all just crumble. But with the metalsmithing and with the art, I found that the hours that I spent with the practice created a physical product that was undeniable.
And you did it in private.
Yeah. Yeah. And then show the result
So
after.
if you were going to choke, nobody saw that.
Yeah. But it's funny. So I'm interested to know if you're familiar with this term. It's called woodshedding. Have you heard of this term?
No, but like the poetics of it.
It's a music ism. It's from the music world where when they say, okay, you just got to go woodshed this, you just got to go practice it. You just go back into the woodshed with your trombone and you just do it 100 times. And sometimes with art, with technique, that's what you got to do. You just got to,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
It's like learning how to use wax to make sculpture, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real challenge for some people.
Yeah. But the more you do it, the better you get.
Oh, nice.
Let's see. I'm
Head
just
time or behind time? I think we've got, I don't know, did you want to finish at 4 o'clock or?
I mean, I think I'm just trying to make sure that I don't miss anything. So, but we talked about why of the iron. And, I think that this would be probably a good, I mean, we're not going to finish right at 4 o'clock because I think I'll ask you your advice and then we'll go over to the after show and maybe tell some stories. So, do you have any advice that you could give us?
Now, I assume you mean in terms of making a decision about whether to go into the fine arts or not?
Just at all. I mean, some people will say wear safety glasses. Some people are very literal with their advice. Some people are more emotional, like follow your heart. Some people, some guests will talk about um persistence, perseverance. So it's not necessary. It's like any advice that maybe it's advice that you wish you had been given when you were.
Got it. No matter when you start, I would seek a mentor as just about the most important thing next to learning your technique and your theories and so on and so forth. I'd seek a mentor, and not one that's going to be all strokes and gentle folks. I'm trying to find somebody that would be indeed challenging, but that means they have to know you pretty well. I mean, and you have to trust them. I had several mentors, and I'll never forget them because they had everything to do with my continuing. Just like yours were telling you to go to the woodshed, mine would say other things, but same idea, and steer me clear of becoming either eclectic or a copyist. Steer me toward who to look at, why, and make encouragements. I mean, they need to be critical, but they also need to make some encouragements. Otherwise, you just get devastated. Especially after a while, you trust your mentor and suddenly they're turning on you. That's not going to work. So a mentor, a space somewhere in your house or garage or something that you can call a workspace, not necessarily a studio, but somewhere where you can make your own mess and come back to and find everything in the same place. I mean, maybe it's just the corner of the dining room table. Lucas Samaras, who I don't know if you know who that is, but amazing New York artist, for years and years and years, worked on the dining room table. And I always thought about that as I was thinking, God, I need to have this tool and that machine and 5 assistants and this and that and the other thing. I'd go, yeah, but Samaras just worked on the dining room table. And so I never met him, but that was a way of looking at somebody and allowing that to become a mentor to my own aggression. And knowing that I don't have to have all of this stuff. Although I have had the stuff and I loved it, don't get me wrong, but that would be a private space, in other words. So a mentor, private space, and a research resource. So that's going to be very geographically dependent, but it could be your local museum.
Mm-hmm.
It could be the Met in New York. It could be your school. Obviously, it could be your school or your former classmates. But you need to have something that is external of yourself, in addition to your mentor, that you can go to for private inspiration, I would call it. I've never come out of a museum without wanting to go make more art. Always. I mean, that's been one of my inspirations, is to go to a museum. When we lived in Rome, I went to the Villa Giulia, which is an Etruscan museum. I thought it was fantastic. And nothing to do with modern art, but it did, because the optic influence of of making a figure has now become one of the more abstract forms that we actually know in figurative work. So I mean, it's just amazing how these things also will come back around.
Yeah.
So mentor, private space, research zone, and a way of training yourself when you're not working to do something that will feed into the work. Look at an art book, read a really good book. Without being overly zealous, don't waste time. You know, so if you're reading a book, look at an art magazine, do some doodle drawing. And then when you feel like not working, don't work. Because in that period is when you gestate. You might not even know you're doing it, but you are running stuff through your head, through your little brain, through your emotional syntax, your emotional being. And if it's going to stick, you may not even know where it came from, but it'll come out.
Thank you. Those are 4 very, very good pillars of advice. Yeah.
Good.
I think I needed to hear all of them. So that's really, I'm very, very grateful that you mentioned all of those. And so are you ready to go on over to the after show? I'm trying to think if there was something else I was gonna mention, but I think we've
edit and slice and dice. If you think of something while we go to the next part, you can go ahead and go there. And I can move around.
Okay. Yeah. And I have done that.
Go wherever you want. So
okay. And I have done that in previous episodes too. There'll be like a really juicy nugget in the after show, and I'll be like, the public needs to know. And so I'll find a way to get it in. So, but let's see if we could tease something that we're going to talk about in the after show. So usually for the after show, I kind of prompt the guest to think of a story, usually an iron related story, if that's okay. But either about a pour, or if you want to talk about a specific event or memories from a SLOS conference, or, we've talked about, if you have any memories from when you were studying under Julius, or memories with Mary or George, or anything. Am I triggering anything to pop
not
up?
immediately.
Oh no.
Mary's not very far away from here, she's down here.
Yeah.
So we had a foundry here run by a man named Donnie Keene.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm familiar. So he was just at the Iron Tribe. He and Mary were both at Iron Tribe.
Well, he put together a workshop that Mary and I were both in.
Okay.
At the foundry, at his foundry.
Wait, are we in the after show? Are you telling the story? Should we move over to the after show and talk about this in the after show?
Okay.
Yeah, let's do
Whatever.
it. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say goodbye to the public audience. You and I are not going to hang up, but we'll say goodbye to the public audience. And Steve, thank you so much for letting me interview you. I've learned so much from just talking to you today, but then also I've learned so much from people that you've influenced, like Erin, but also just people talking about how much you did play a huge role in the movement. And so I'm really glad that I was able to get it firsthand from you, kind of your story. So, all right. So we'll say goodbye to the public audience, but come on over to the after show and listen to Steve talk about Donnie Keene's symposium, right?
It was a symposium, yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This conversation doesn't have to end here. To gain access to the after show where Steve and I continue our discussion, visit the website patreon.com/thepodcastiron. And their supporters at any contribution level get access to the after show recordings from every episode that has ever been published. So if you don't know, the after show is just an extra 15 to 20 minutes with each show's guest where we talk a little more candidly and share at least one more story behind the privacy of a paywall. In the after show from this episode, Steve continues his recollection of the Keen Foundry Symposium that he attended, and he also gives us some more details of his time at Cranbrook, where he was studying under Julius Schmidt in the mid-60s. So yes, if you sign up now, you'll get access to listen to Steve's after show and all of the after shows for all of the earlier guests. And if you like what I'm doing with this project and you want to help support the show, this is the best way to do it. For as little as $1 a month, you can contribute more, but even just $1, it really makes a difference to subsidize the costs that I undertake to make this resource publicly available for you. And also, you get the after shows, so that's a win-win for everyone. Well, in conclusion to this public portion of the episode, I learned so much from Steve about how iron in art started and was spread, and we owe a great debt of gratitude to Steve for that little 8.5-inch furnace, as well as everything else that he has shared with us throughout the years. Steve, thank you for all of your gifts. I humbly say thank you for the gift of this interview, but also thank you for being an outstanding role model and demonstrating how an individual can lead an inspirational life. During your career as a professor, you positively affected so many students' lives, and then they themselves went on to do amazing things after your mentorship. But also as an artist, you demonstrate that we really can use our entire lives to create our bodies of work, and the prospect to me is very promising. So thank you. And now thank you to our top supporters for helping me afford to continue offering this show. Thank you to the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance for being a top supporter, and I'm so honored and encouraged to have your support. Thank you for all of the work that you do in service for the Western region of the U.S. and its cast iron artists. And thank you, Sloss Metal Arts, for doing such a great job hosting the national conference earlier this month. And by extension, thank you to this round of committee members for the NCCC IAP. You guys rocked it, and I know that sometimes it seems like a thankless job, but I want you to know that we all love you and we thank you so much. So yes, thank you, Sloss Metal Arts and the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance for supporting this podcast, as well as all of our other individual supporters on Patreon. The funds that they contribute are invaluable to help me continue to producing these episodes. But if you don't have it in your budget to support the podcast Iron on Patreon, that's okay. Instead, please share this podcast with someone you think would be interested in listening or watching, and I'll appreciate that just as much. Anything and everything helps, and for that I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And one more thing I want to shout out right before I sign off, as I mentioned it in the last episode, but our friends Ashley Smith and Kurt Brashears run the Spirit Sculpture Gardens and Marketplace in Smith Center, Kansas, and they'll be hosting their very first community iron pour on Saturday, May 6th. So if any of you listening are in Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, or that whole area, you should go. You can contact them on Facebook or on Instagram Messenger for more information, but I just Googled Spirit Sculpture Garden, Kansas, Facebook, and all of the information came right up. But I'll obviously include a link in the, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm finally done. But if you want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great day.